Beautiful, beautiful soul, welcome to The Answers. And I am so glad that you are here. I am so grateful. I am so grateful for all the DMs, all the clients I get through this podcast, all the life stories that I get. Keep sending it to me, keep reaching out if you need me as a coach. This is a community and we are working from the light here. So we will climb that biggest and highest vibration together. Isn't that beautiful? Now, let's dig into today's topic. And I want you now to take a deep breath before we start, because today's topic is one that I think quietly runs underneath almost every disappointment you have ever felt in your own life. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So stay with me now. We are talking about the difference between interest and intention. And I know it sounds like a simple distinction, but it is not. There is a huge difference between interest and intention. All right. And I promise you, once you go deep on this, once you go and take the layers out, you will recognize it everywhere, in your relationships, in your work, in the promises you make to yourself every January, and quietly abandon yourself by February or during the day, actually. And in the way you have been explaining your own life to yourself for years without even really questioning the story. So get comfortable now and let's go. We start with the teaching, right? So let's start with a plain difference, because language matters here more than people and more than you can realize. And then most of us have spent our whole lives conflating these two words as though they mean the same thing, when they really sit on the opposite sides of the canyon. And the bridge between them is the one thing that you often never built. Interest is the feeling, interest is the spark, the curiosity, the oh, that would be nice, the Pinterest board, the wish list, the fantasy you replay in your head right before you fall asleep. And there is nothing wrong with interest. Interest is where everything begins, but interest costs you nothing. And that is exactly the problem. Because anything that costs you nothing will rarely produce anything of value. Intention, on the other hand, is a decision that has a weight behind it. It's a decision that you have already paid for in your nervous system before the outcome even shows up. And when you are truly intentional about something, you don't need motivation to keep going, because you are not waiting to feel like it anymore. You already decided, and that decision itself becomes the engine, not the mood on any given Tuesday. The part that stings a little bit now, and I say this with so much love, if you have ever said for years, let's say you have said for years that you want something, that you are interested in changing maybe your health, your relationship, your finances, your spiritual life, your creative work, wherever it is for you, and yet the pattern of your days has not moved even an inch in that direction, then what you actually have is an interest and not an intention. And the gap between those two words are where you quietly live most of your life, wondering why nothing changes, even though you want it so badly. Intention shows up in your calendar. Intention shows up in your bank statement. Intention shows up in what you protect when things get hard. Because interest evaporates the moment discomfort enters the room. But intention was built to withstand exactly that kind of weather. Since real intention was never dependent on things feeling good in the first place. And I want you to sit with that question for a second. You don't need to answer it, but sit with it and ask yourself now, where in your life have you been mistaking a feeling for a decision and calling it a goal? Where in your life have you been mistaking a feeling for a decision, yet you called it a goal? All right. I want to tell you a life story. I'm going to change some details, of course, but the shape of it is real. And I think that almost everyone listening have some lived version of this story. So let's see if you recognize yourself. There is this woman, let's call her Anna, who had been saying for 3 years that she wanted to leave her corporate job and start her own design studio. And every time she talked about it, her eyes just lit up and lighted up. She pulled out her phone and she showed pictures and mock-ups she had made late in the night. She had her whole folder of potential client names and logo design just for the run, and a name for the business that she has already trademarked and had a website on. And she has this in her mind all the time, but nothing existed yet, right? And if you meet her at the dinner party, you would have sworn now that this woman was one signature away from launching her whole empire now. But 3 years passed, all right, and nothing moved. And what's interesting now is that Anna wasn't lazy, and she wasn't lying to herself on purpose. She genuinely believed she wanted this thing because she was so interested. The interest was so loud, so vivid, so emotionally real to her that she mistook now the intensity of the feeling for presence of decision. And those are not the same thing at all. And I think all of you have been here sometime in your life. For sure I have been. What actually happened now, when we look at this closely, is that every single time an opportunity showed up that would have required her to trade comfort for direction, she found a reason. That timing was not right. The market was too competitive. She needed one more certification. Her current job has just gotten easier. So it made sense to stay a little bit longer. And each of those reasons sounded completely rational in the moment, because the mind is extraordinarily good at protecting you from the one thing you say you want. If that thing also threatens your sense of safety, you will stay. And you stay with interest, not intention. Intention is a decision. The turning point now for Anna here didn't come from a burst of motivation. It didn't come from a podcast or a book or a sudden epiphany at a yoga retreat. It came from something much quieter and much harder, which was when she finally admitted to herself. When you do that with awareness in a moment now, something happens, because for her, in a moment of real honesty, that she had been using the language of intention to describe something that was only over interest. And that admission, as painful as it was, it is actually what created the opening for something to shift now. Because once she stopped pretending that the wanting itself was the work, she was able now to ask a completely different question. Not, do I want this? Because she already knew that the answer to that. But the different question now was, am I willing to build a structure around this desire that will hold even when I don't feel for it? Even when I don't feel for it. Feelings has nothing to do with intention. And that second question is the question, the one that separates you from talking about your life, from actually living your life. She's now started small, one client on the side, one evening a week protected, no matter what. Not because she felt inspired that particular evening, but because she had decided to. And 6 months later now, that corporate job, she stopped that entirely. And I want you now to notice, the shift was not dramatic. The shift was a decision that got repeated until it became an identity. She made it. She made it through the intention. Now, there is another part here that is very important. That is the spiritual perspective. So we go another layer deeper here, because I don't want to leave this on the surface. I always want to go deep here. And I want you to look directly at the mechanism running underneath your own behavior. So let's do that together now. And I'm going to ask you to be really, really honest with yourself here. Not for me, but for you. The ego the ego does not actually want you to fulfill your attentions, because fulfillment requires the dissolving of your story. And the ego's entire survival depends on the story staying intact. So the ego now is perfectly happy to let you stay in interest forever, because interest keeps the fantasy alive without even forcing the identity to change. And change is the one thing the ego experiences as a kind of a death. Oh, this is deep, I know. Do you want me to repeat that? Do you want me to repeat that? I will do that again. The ego is the one change that, or we do like this. Change is the one thing that ego experiences as a kind of a death. And this is why you and so many people can talk about the dreams with so much passion and so much detail, and yet never move. Because talking itself has become the substitute for the doing. The ego has found a clever loophole. It lets you feel like you are already the person who wants that life, without even requiring you to become the person who builds it. And that feeling of already being it, that's the trap. Because it releases just enough dopamine to satisfy the craving without even demanding the sacrifice. There is a conditioned self in you, a version of you assembled out of old survival strategies, old fears, old beliefs about what you are capable of and what you deserve, and that you conditioned yourself will always choose the familiar suffering of staying the same, or the unfamiliar uncertainty of actual change. And even when the familiar suffering is genuinely painful, because the nervous system prioritizes predictability over happiness every single time, unless you consciously interrupt that pattern. And here is the deeper, so here is the spiritual work. And it is not comfortable, but it is honest. Intention requires you to stop asking the universe to prove it's safe before you commit, and instead commit first and let safety come from your own steadiness, not from external conditioning ever lining up perfectly, because it will never do that. There is no version of your life where every circumstance says yes at the same time. There is only the version where you decided, and the world, the universe, recognized around that decision, and that decision universe will give to you when you vibrate on that decision. You are not here to want your life. You are here to choose your life on purpose again and again, especially on the days it gives you even reasons not to. And this is the true of love. Maybe more true than love of anything else, because love is a place where most people of us have practiced interest for years while calling it intention. And it's costing people the very connection they say that they want more than anything. All right? Start within, get up on the right vibration, and universe will answer to that. Now, because I work as a dating and relationship coach, I want you, of course, to bring you home to the dating arena. We need to go there. I see this pattern most vividly. And if you are single or dating right now, I want you to really let this part to sink in. Because this is where interest versus intention becomes almost impossible to hide from. Interest in dating looks like this. It looks like swiping for hours and matching with dozens of people and never actually meeting any of them. It looks like the deep late night text conversation that never turns into a real date. It looks like being obsessed with the idea of a person, the potential of them, the fantasy of who they could become, while avoiding the vulnerable, unglamorous work of actually finding out who they really are in person across from you, with no filter and no delay to hide behind. All right? You cannot hide. Interest also looks like wanting a relationship in theory, wanting the partnership, the photos, the person to come home to you, while your actual behavior says something completely different. You cancel dates because you're tired. You keep talking to several people at once you know? So no single connection ever gets the depth. And it needs to grow to get the depth. You say you want commitment, but you constantly and consistently choose the person who is emotional unavailable. Because unavailability keeps the whole thing safe and whole thing safe in the real and the fantasy, where nothing is ever required of you and nothing can ever really disappoint you after. All right, this is interest. Intention now in dating looks completely different. Completely different. And I want you to pay attention now. It is much less romantic sounding, but far more powerful. Intention looks like showing up to a first date, even when you have had a hard day. And a part of you wants to cancel, but you're still there, you're still showing up. That's intention. It looks like being honest early about what you want instead of performing whatever you think the other person wants to hear. It looks like choosing depth over options, meaning you rather go deep with one person and find out if it's real than keep on endless rosters of maybes that protects you from ever being actually seen. I had a client, I called him David, when he came to me, he convinced me that he was so ready for a relationship. I'm so ready. He had a vision board. He had journalized about his future partner. He had every quality listed in detail, and yet David has not been on one actual date in over 1 year. Because every time someone showed him real interest, someone kind, someone available, someone who actually met the list he has been written, yeah, he will always find a flaw and a reason not to get to that date, a reason to wasn't quite right, and a reason to keep waiting. And we uncovered this together, and David was actually interested in love, deeply interested in love. But he had never once made one intention toward it, because intention would have required him to risk being chosen and then possibly still not being enough. And interest let him avoid the risk completely while still feeling that he is doing the work, because in his fantasy and his interest he is, but not in the attention. The shift for David now was not a new dating app or a better profile picture. It was a decision, a real one, that he would go on a date every single week, regardless how he felt about his match beforehand. It was a decision to go on a date even when he didn't feel for it. Do you see here how we tie the knots and the red thread here? The intention is not mixed with the feelings. The interest is everything with the cost and the feelings, all right? And the fears, of course. Now, also that he would stay curious past the first 30 minutes instead of exiting at the first sign of imperfection. And that he would tell the truth about what he really wanted instead of waiting for the other person to guess it. And within a few months, that structure, that unglamorous, that unremarkable structure is what led him into a relationship. He now sees and he says feels more real than anything he had ever imagined on that vision board. So if you are dating right now, ask yourself, are you interested in love or are you intentional about it? Because interest will keep you comfortable and endless hopeful, but intention is the only thing that will actually lead you to a real chosen, sustained connection with another person. And you deserve that, not the fantasy of it, the actual thing. So now, are you interested or do you have an intention? Feel that one. Now, let's bring this home as we come to the end of this episode. I want you now to think of one area of your life where you confuse interest for intention. Just one. You don't need to fix your whole life today. That's actually another trap. The desire to overhaul everything at once, which is usually just another form of staying interested rather than becoming intentional about one real thing. Now, pick the one area and ask yourself what a decision would actually look like there. Not a feeling, not a hope, a decision. Something you would do even on a day you don't feel for it. Something small enough to be sustainable about and real enough to matter. And then protect that one decision the way you protected something you truly loved. Because you are worth that kind of devotion from yourself. Now, let's end this beautiful episode with some beautiful affirmations, as you all know is my favorite part. So take a deep breath and repeat after me. I am someone who follows through on what I decide, not just what I feel. My intentions are backed by actions, not just imagination. I no longer need perfect conditions to begin. I choose my life on purpose, especially on the hard days. I release the need to feel ready before I commit. My decisions create my identity, not the other way around. I am willing to trade comfort for the real life I actually want. I am building a life I don't need to escape from. Thank you for being with me here today. And if you want to contact me, you can do so on my email, info@janettevinberg.se, or all over the social media with my name, Janette Winberg. And until next week, Wednesday, when I release the next episode, stay true to yourself. Have the best week. Take care of yourself. And with lots of love from me to you.